If you can beat me in chess, I'll marry you. Arrogant billionaire mocked. Black janitor played like a genius. If you can beat me in chess, I'll marry you. Victoria Sterling's voice cut through the marble halls of Manhattan's most exclusive club like a blade, her diamond bracelet glinting as she gestured dismissively at the black janitor who had just made the most brilliant opening move she'd ever seen, never knowing that in exactly 57 minutes, she'd be begging him to say yes. Before we get deep into today's story, I really want to know where you are watching from. Please, drop in the comments section where you're watching. Hit the subscribe button if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow, I have created something very special just for you, another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Once again, welcome to Mr. Paul Stories, where we come together like old friends, wrapped in the warmth of stories that light up our souls. Before we dive into today's magical tale, let's take a quiet moment to hold each other close in spirit with a heartfelt prayer. Oh, please let our hearts be filled to the brim with love, may our spirits soar with hope and wonder, and may a shower of blessings wrap us in peace and joy. I pray these stories bind us tighter, lift us higher, and remind us of the beauty in every shared moment. Amen. Now, my precious friends, with all my love for you, let's begin today's story. The click of Victoria Sterling's Louboutin heels echoed through the marble halls of the Manhattan Chess Club like a countdown to someone's destruction. At 28, she had never lost. Not a business deal, not a chess match, and certainly not her heart. The Sterling Industries heiress surveyed the ornate room where Manhattan's elite gathered every Thursday evening, their million-dollar conversations floating between antique chess sets like expensive perfume. "Victoria, darling." Her friend Chloe waved from a corner table. "We were just discussing the charity auction. Will Sterling Industries be donating again this year?" Victoria's smile was sharp as her manicured nails. "Of course. Daddy insists on maintaining appearances." She settled into the velvet chair, her eyes scanning the room with the predatory precision of someone who had never known want. "Though I sometimes wonder what we're really buying, charity or just a clear conscience." The conversation turned to the usual gossip: who was dating whom in their social circle, which families were merging businesses, which eligible bachelors were worth pursuing. Victoria listened with half an ear, her attention drawn to the soft sound of someone moving quietly between the tables. What happens when someone's whole world is built on always winning? Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever met someone who's never faced real defeat? Across the city, in a cramped studio apartment in Queens, David Washington bent over a worn chess book by lamplight. His janitor uniform hung on a hook by the door, still smelling of industrial cleaner and the long halls of corporate buildings he maintained each night. At 31, his hands bore the calluses of manual labor, but his mind held the strategic brilliance of a grandmaster, a secret he'd buried beneath years of necessity and survival. The book in his hands was My 60 Memorable Games by Bobby Fischer, its pages soft from countless readings. David's grandmother had given it to him when he was 12, back when he dreamed of championships and glory instead of overtime shifts and rent payments. "You got a gift, baby," she used to say, watching him solve chess puzzles that stumped adults. "Don't you ever let the world convince you otherwise." But the world had been convincing, hadn't it? Scholarship opportunities that never materialized, tournament fees he couldn't afford, a system that seemed designed to keep people like him invisible. So he'd become exactly that, invisible, moving through the shadows of buildings owned by people who would never see him as anything more than the man who emptied their trash. His phone buzzed. Another text from his cleaning supervisor: "Emergency at Manhattan Chess Club. Cover Marcus's shift tonight. Big event." David closed the book, pressed it against his chest for just a moment, then reached for his uniform. He had no idea that in 2 hours, his entire life was about to change. The irony wasn't lost on him, heading to clean a chess club when he hadn't played a real game in over 5 years. But irony, he'd learned, was just life's way of preparing you for something bigger. As he locked his apartment door and headed into the New York night, David Washington had no idea that destiny was waiting for him in the marble halls of Manhattan's most exclusive chess club, wearing designer heels and a smile that had never known defeat. The city hummed around him, 8 million stories intersecting in invisible ways, but tonight, only two would matter. David pushed through the service entrance of the Manhattan Chess Club at exactly 9:47 p.m., his cleaning cart rattling softly against the marble floors. The main hall buzzed with the refined chatter of New York's elite, their laughter echoing off crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's annual salaries. He moved with practiced invisibility, the kind perfected by those who work in spaces they don't belong. "Excuse me." Victoria's voice cut through his methodical routine like a blade. She stood 3 feet away, her emerald dress catching the light in ways that suggested money, old money, the kind that bought confidence along with couture. "You're blocking my view." David looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. They were hazel, sharp with the kind of intelligence that had never been questioned or dismissed. For a moment, something flickered between them, recognition perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of two minds that operated differently than most. "Sorry, ma'am," he said quietly, moving his cart aside. But Victoria didn't look away. Her gaze traveled from his worn work boots to his name tag, lingering on his face with an expression David couldn't quite read. Around them, the chess matches continued, soft clicks of pieces, murmured strategies, the occasional gasp of defeat. "You know," she said, her voice carrying the particular brand of cruelty that only comes from a lifetime of unchallenged privilege, "I've always wondered if people like you understand games like this." She gestured toward the nearest chessboard with a manicured hand. "I mean, do you even know how the pieces move?" The words hit David like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. Years of invisible work had taught him to swallow pride like medicine, bitter, but necessary for survival. "I know a little," he said carefully. Victoria's laugh was silver and sharp. "A little? How charming." She turned to her friends, who had gathered like sharks sensing blood. "Did you hear that, girls? He knows a little about chess." Chloe giggled behind her champagne flute. "Victoria, you're terrible." But Victoria was just getting started. Something about David's quiet dignity seemed to challenge her, to demand that she prove her superiority in ways that went beyond net worth and family name. "Tell you what," she said, her voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "I'm feeling generous tonight. If you can beat me in a chess game, I'll give you." She paused dramatically, her eyes glittering with malicious amusement. $1,000. The offer hung in the air like expensive perfume, intoxicating and dangerous. Several conversations stopped. People turned to watch, sensing the particular entertainment that comes from watching someone's dignity get dissected in public. David's hands stilled on his cleaning supplies. $1,000 would cover his grandmother's medical bills, the ones that kept him awake at night calculating impossible mathematics. But the humiliation in Victoria's voice, the casual cruelty of her assumption, made his jaw tighten. "Actually," Victoria continued, warming to her theme, "let's make it more interesting." Her voice dropped to a theatrical whisper that somehow carried across the entire room. "If you can beat me, and we both know you can't, I'll marry you." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the chess clocks seemed to stop ticking. Victoria stood there in her emerald dress, surrounded by her friends, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having been truly challenged. But David Washington had spent 31 years being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked. Something deep in his chest, something that had been sleeping for years, began to wake up. He straightened slowly, his full height bringing him eye level with Victoria's defiant gaze. When he spoke, His voice was quiet but carried the weight of every brilliant move he'd ever imagined, every game he'd played alone in his apartment, every dream he'd been told to abandon. "All right," he said. "I accept." The room erupted in whispers, gasps, and barely contained excitement. Someone called for a board to be set up at the center table. Chairs were arranged like an arena. Victoria's friends pressed closer, their phones already recording what they assumed would be a brief and amusing destruction. But as David removed his cleaning gloves and rolled up his sleeves, something shifted in his posture. His shoulders squared. His eyes sharpened. For the first time in years, David Washington allowed himself to remember who he really was. Victoria settled into the white pieces with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "I hope you don't mind losing in front of an audience," she murmured, her manicured fingers already reaching for her king's pawn. David's response was a quiet smile that somehow contained multitudes. "I hope you don't mind keeping your promise." Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's assumptions came back to haunt them? Tell us in the comments. What's the biggest surprise you've ever seen someone deliver when they were completely underestimated? The game was about to begin, and neither player yet understood that they were gambling with far more than money or marriage. They were betting their hearts, their futures, and everything they thought they knew about themselves. Victoria moved her pawn to e4. David responded with e5. And in that simple exchange, two worlds that had never been meant to touch began their inevitable collision. The silence stretched between them like a chasm neither wanted to cross. Victoria stared at the chessboard, her mind racing through possibilities that made no logical sense. A janitor, had just dismantled her Sicilian defense with moves she'd only seen in championship games. The weight of every watching eye in the Manhattan Chess Club pressed down on her shoulders like lead. "Lucky move," she said finally, her voice carrying the brittle edge of someone grasping for control. "Beginners often stumble into good positions." David's fingers hovered over his knight, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. But it vanished so quickly Victoria almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. "Maybe," he said quietly, making his next move with the same calculated precision that had already cost her a bishop and two pawns. "Or maybe some people just see the board differently." Victoria's friends had gathered in a tight circle behind her chair, their whispered conversations like hornets buzzing in her ears. She caught fragments. "Embarrassing. How is this possible? What will people think?" "Victoria, perhaps you should call it a night," Chloe suggested, her manicured hand touching Victoria's shoulder. "You've had a long day, and—" "I'm fine." Victoria shrugged away the touch, her jaw set in a line that had intimidated boardroom executives twice her age. She moved her queen aggressively, sacrificing position for the illusion of attack. One lucky sequence doesn't make him Fisher. But even as she said it, David was already 3 moves ahead, his response so swift and elegant it made her stomach drop. He wasn't just playing well, he was playing like someone who understood chess the way poets understood language, seeing patterns and possibilities that existed beyond the mere movement of pieces. "Your turn," David said, and there was no mockery in his voice, no triumph. Just patience, as if he had all the time in the world. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her rook. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Victoria Sterling didn't lose to anyone, let alone someone who. She caught herself before the thought could fully form, but the ugliness of it sat bitter on her tongue. Someone who what? Someone who cleaned buildings for a living? Someone whose skin was darker than hers? Someone who probably couldn't afford her shoes, let alone her lifestyle? The realization of what she'd been thinking made her feel sick. "I need a break," she announced, standing so abruptly her chair scraped against the marble floor. 5 minutes. She fled toward the ladies' room, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of retreat. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of voices rising, speculation and gossip spreading like wildfire through the club's refined atmosphere. In the mirror of the powder room, Victoria stared at her reflection. Perfectly applied makeup, diamond earrings that cost more than most people's cars, a designer dress that made her look untouchable. But her eyes were wide with something she rarely allowed herself to feel: genuine uncertainty. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends, from business associates who'd already heard whispers of what was happening upstairs. The Sterling family reputation, built over 3 generations, could withstand stock market crashes and corporate scandals. But losing a chess match to a janitor? In public? At the Manhattan Chess Club where she'd been photographed for society pages dozens of times? She could quit. Walk away. Claim she wasn't feeling well, that it didn't matter, that it was all just a silly game anyway. But the memory of David's eyes stopped her, not mocking, not cruel, just sad. Disappointed, maybe, that she would think so little of him. And underneath that sadness, something else. A depth that spoke of intelligence carefully hidden, of dreams deferred, of a man who'd learned to make himself invisible in a world that had never wanted to see him anyway. When she returned to the table, David was still sitting quietly, his hands folded in his lap. He hadn't touched the board, hadn't studied the position. He'd simply waited. "I thought you might not come back," he said softly. "The Sterling family doesn't quit," Victoria replied, settling back into her chair with renewed determination. It was a lie, of course. The Sterling family quit all the time: marriages, friendships, businesses that weren't profitable enough. But this felt different. This felt like something that mattered in ways she couldn't yet understand. "Then let's finish this properly," David said, and when he smiled, Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in the armor she'd spent years building around her heart. The game resumed, but the stakes felt heavier now. This wasn't just about chess anymore. It was about everything she believed about herself, about the world, about what made someone valuable. And with each move David made, brilliant, intuitive, devastating, Victoria felt those beliefs crumbling like ancient walls finally meeting their match. Ever find yourself defending something you know is wrong just because admitting the truth feels too scary? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the hardest person to be honest with is yourself. The security lockdown trapped them in the Manhattan Chess Club's main hall, like opposing pieces on a board with nowhere to retreat. Victoria's initial smugness had curdled into something resembling panic as she realized she was genuinely losing to a man she dismissed as intellectually inferior just hours ago. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, standing abruptly from the chess table. Her chair scraped against the marble floor with an expensive screech. "There has to be another way out." David remained seated, his dark eyes following her agitated pacing. The security guard said minimum 2 hours before they can override the system. Something about a power grid failure affecting the Upper East Side. His voice carried no mockery, only patient observation. Victoria's phone buzzed incessantly, missed calls from her father, her assistant, board members who expected her presence at tomorrow's merger announcement. Each notification felt like another nail in the coffin of her carefully controlled life. She was Victoria Sterling. She didn't get trapped. She didn't lose control. And she certainly didn't find herself intellectually outmaneuvered by a janitor. "You're enjoying this," she accused, whirling around to face him. David's laugh was soft, almost sad. "You think I enjoy being looked at like I'm something you stepped in? You think I enjoy watching someone realize they might have to treat me like a human being for 2 whole hours?" The words hit harder than any chess move. Victoria felt heat creep up her neck, not anger, but something uncomfortably close to shame. She'd built her identity on being sharp, successful, untouchable. When had she become cruel? "I didn't," she started, then stopped. Because she had. She absolutely had. The club's emergency lighting cast everything in a golden glow, softening the harsh edges of their confrontation. David stood and walked to the massive windows overlooking Central Park. The city stretched below them, lights twinkling like scattered diamonds, millions of lives carrying on while they sat suspended in this marble purgatory. "You know what the funny thing is?" David said, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I used to dream about places like this. When I was a kid, I thought if I just got good enough, smart enough, I'd earn my way into rooms like this one." Victoria found herself moving closer, drawn by something in his voice she couldn't name. "What happened?" "Life happened. My grandmother got sick. Medical bills. I had to choose between tournament fees and keeping the lights on." His smile was rueful. "Turns out chess brilliance doesn't pay rent when you're a black kid from Queens with no connections." She studied his profile in the window's reflection. The harsh fluorescent lighting she was used to seeing him under had hidden the intelligence in his features, the quiet dignity in how he carried himself. Now, in the club's warm glow, she saw him clearly for the first time. "That move you made, the knight sacrifice in the middle game," she said quietly. "That was Capablanca's style." David turned, surprise flickering across his face. "You know Capablanca?" "My grandfather taught me. He said Capablanca could see 20 moves ahead, that he played chess like other people breathed." Victoria's voice grew softer. "He would have appreciated what you did tonight." For a moment, the space between them felt different. Less like a battlefield, more like possibility. "Why didn't you tell me?" Victoria asked. "When I was being so arrogant, condescending, cruel." David's tone held no malice, just tired honesty. Victoria flinched. "All of that?" "Yes." "Would it have mattered? Would you have believed me if I'd said I was a chess master working as a janitor?" David moved back toward the chessboard, where their game sat frozen in time. "Or would you have thought I was lying, trying to impress you?" The question hung between them like incense. Victoria knew the answer, and it wasn't flattering. "I don't know," she admitted, the words foreign on her tongue. When was the last time she'd admitted uncertainty about anything? David nodded, as if her honesty was exactly what he'd expected. "That's more honest than most people would be." They stood on opposite sides of the chessboard now, the game between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Victoria's phone had stopped buzzing. The world outside had faded to background noise. In this forced intimacy, stripped of their usual armor, her wealth, his invisibility, they were just two people seeing each other clearly for the first time. "Tell me about your grandmother," Victoria said, settling back into her chair across from him. David's eyes widened slightly. In all his years of being invisible, of being spoken around rather than to, no one had ever asked about the people he loved. "She was everything," he said, his voice catching slightly. "Raised me when my parents couldn't. Worked 3 jobs to keep me in school, in chess clubs when I was young. She used to say that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the armor she'd worn so long she'd forgotten it was there. "She sounds wise." She was. "She died believing I'd find my way back to chess somehow. That all those years of study and sacrifice would mean something." David's fingers traced one of the chess pieces. "I've been letting her down for 5 years now." "No," Victoria said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "Look at this game. Look at what you just did to me, and I'm good, David. Really good. Your grandmother would be proud." The use of his name, not Janitor or you, but his actual name, seemed to surprise them both. David looked up, meeting her eyes fully for the first time that evening. "Victoria," he said, testing her name the same way. That's not what your friends call you. They call me Vic. Or Sterling, when they're trying to remind me who my father is. She paused. But Victoria, that's what my grandfather called me. The one who taught me chess. Something was happening between them in this forced proximity, something neither had expected when they'd sat down at this board. The chess game had become secondary to a different kind of strategy, the delicate dance of two people discovering they might not be enemies after all. Outside, New York continued its relentless pulse, but inside the locked halls of the Manhattan Chess Club, time moved differently. Two worlds were colliding, and neither Victoria Sterling nor David Washington would emerge unchanged. Have you ever been forced to really see someone you'd completely misjudged? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes our biggest assumptions reveal more about us than the people we're judging. The silence in Victoria's penthouse stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. David sat across from her at the marble chessboard, his fingers still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of their match. Outside, Manhattan glittered 40 stories below, but inside this glass tower, two souls were about to bear their deepest wounds. You want to know why I laughed when you beat me? Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn photograph, a little girl with pigtails playing chess with an elderly black man on a park bench in Philadelphia. This was me at 7 with James. David's breath caught. The little girl's eyes held none of the cruelty he'd seen earlier, only pure joy and concentration. James worked for my grandfather's company. He was, Victoria's voice cracked. He was the kindest man I ever knew. Every Sunday after church, he'd meet me at Rittenhouse Square and teach me chess. He said I had natural talent, that intelligence had nothing to do with money or color, only with the willingness to think. She traced the edge of the photograph with her finger. My father found out when I was 10. Said it was inappropriate for a Sterling to be seen playing games with the help. He fired James the next Monday. Her tears fell freely now. I never saw him again. I tried to find him, but Daddy made sure he could never work in Philadelphia again. James just disappeared. David felt his heart shatter and rebuild itself in the same moment. Victoria. I became everything James would have hated, she continued. Cruel, dismissive, using people's circumstances against them. Tonight, when you played that King's Indian defense, that was James's favorite opening. He taught me that exact sequence. She looked up at David, her makeup streaked but her eyes finally, truly vulnerable. When you beat me, it was like James was reaching through time to remind me who I used to be. David stood slowly, moved to the window overlooking Central Park. My grandmother taught me chess, he said quietly. Worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat in Detroit after my parents died. Every night, no matter how tired she was, she'd sit with me at our kitchen table and we'd play. He pressed his palm against the cool glass. She died my senior year of high school. Full scholarship to Northwestern, chess scholarship. I had to turn it down to work, pay for her funeral. Victoria moved to stand beside him. Why didn't you tell anyone about your talent? You mean like Marcus knew? David's laugh was hollow. He was the only one who figured it out. Caught me analyzing positions on break one night. We'd play sometimes, after hours. He was good, but he knew I was better. Much better. He turned to face her. You want to know why I'm really just a janitor? Because the world decided that's all I could be. Every tournament entry fee I couldn't afford, every club that looked right through me, every opportunity that required connections I didn't have. After a while, you stop fighting. You just disappear. But you didn't disappear tonight, Victoria whispered. You were magnificent. Tonight was different. David's eyes met hers. Tonight, I wasn't invisible. Victoria reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a tablet, her fingers flying over the screen. David Washington. Detroit, chess. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. You're in the database. National Junior Championship, runner-up at 17. Rating of 2,200. You were ranked in the top 50 junior players in the country. David's jaw tightened. Was. Past tense. That ranking expires when you can't afford to keep playing. The Chicago Tribune called you a raw talent with grandmaster potential, Victoria read, her voice filled with wonder. Listen to this review. Washington plays with an intuitive brilliance rarely seen in someone so young. His endgame technique is flawless, his tactical vision exceptional. With proper training and support, this young man could represent the future of American chess. She looked up at him. David, you weren't just good. You were extraordinary. Have you ever wondered how many hidden geniuses walk among us, their talents buried by circumstances? Share your thoughts below. What gifts might be waiting to be discovered? David sank into the chair, the weight of what might have been crushing down on him. Do you know what it's like to read your own obituary while you're still alive? That's what those articles feel like now. The death of possibility. Victoria knelt beside his chair, her hand hovering over his before gently taking it. What if it's not death? What if it's just dormancy? What if tonight was your resurrection? Resurrection. David's voice was thick with pain. Victoria, I'm 31 years old. I haven't played competitively in over a decade. The chess world has moved on. There are kids half my age with computers analyzing positions I couldn't dream of accessing. But you beat me, Victoria said fiercely. Without preparation, without practice, you dismantled my game like I was a beginner. That kind of talent doesn't just disappear, David. It waits. He looked at her then, really looked at her, this woman who had transformed from cruel socialite to something raw and real in the span of a single evening. Why do you care? A few hours ago, I was just the help. Victoria's thumb traced across his knuckles. Because James would have cared. Because my 10-year-old self would have cared. Because the woman I'm supposed to be, the woman you helped me remember, she cares. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And because I think I'm falling for a man who can see 20 moves ahead but somehow missed that he was worth more than he believed. David felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for years. I used to dream about the world championship, he admitted. Crazy, right? A kid from Detroit thinking he could take on Kasparov's legacy. But late at night, moving pieces on that old board, I could see it all. Every variation, every possibility, every path to victory. What happened to those dreams? Life, David said simply. Rent. Groceries. Survival. Dreams don't pay bills. Victoria stood, paced to her bookshelf, and returned with a leather-bound journal. My grandfather kept diaries. Business thoughts, life philosophy, regrets. She flipped to a marked page. Here. He wrote this the year before he died. Today I fired the chess teacher. Victoria cried for hours. I told myself it was about propriety, about maintaining social boundaries. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that a little girl might learn that wisdom comes from unexpected places, that the help might be more valuable than the helped. I robbed her of the purest friendship she ever had, and I robbed him of the chance to share his gift. Some sins you can't undo, only learn from. David stared at the page, the elegant handwriting blurred by Victoria's tears. He knew, she whispered. He knew what he'd done to both of us. James, me, even you, All the people like you who never got their chance because men like my grandfather decided who was worthy of opportunity. But that's not your fault, David said gently. Isn't it? Victoria's eyes blazed. I spent 18 years becoming exactly what he made me. Cruel, dismissive, convinced that money meant worth. Tonight you showed me that brilliance has nothing to do with background, that dignity has nothing to do with dollars. She closed the journal, held it against her chest. What if we could change that? What if we could give James's memory the honor it deserved? David felt something shift inside him, like a chess piece finally finding its intended square. What are you saying? Victoria's smile was soft but determined. I'm saying that resurrection might be exactly the right word. The soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in Victoria's penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. David sat at her dining table, a glass surface that probably cost more than his annual salary, studying the chess set she'd retrieved from her father's old study. It wasn't like the ornate pieces at the club. These were simple, elegant, worn smooth by decades of use. My father taught me on this set, Victoria said quietly, settling into the chair across from him. She'd changed from her designer dress into jeans and a cashmere sweater, looking more human than he'd ever seen her. Before the business consumed him. Before I became. She gestured vaguely at the luxury surrounding them. This. David traced one of the pawns with his finger. What was he like? Before. Kind. The word came out like a confession. He used to say chess was the great equalizer, that on the board, only your mind mattered. Your strategy, your patience, your ability to see possibilities others missed. She laughed softly, but there was pain in it. Ironic, considering how I behaved tonight. The city sparkled below them, millions of lights representing millions of stories. David had cleaned windows in buildings like this, always on the outside looking in. Now he sat in the penthouse, invited, welcomed, and somehow it felt more terrifying than any boardroom or tournament hall. Tell me about your grandmother, Victoria said, pouring coffee from an expensive machine. The one who gave you the chess book. David accepted the mug, surprised by how perfectly she'd remembered his coffee preference from their brief conversation at the diner. Grandma Rose. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, caring for elderly folks during the day, and taking in laundry on weekends. That must have been hard. She never complained. Not once. David's voice grew softer. She'd come home exhausted, and I'd be at the kitchen table with my chess set, this cheap plastic one from a thrift store. She'd sit down, even though her feet were killing her, and she'd play with me. Said watching my mind work was better than any television show. Victoria found herself leaning forward, drawn into his story. She sounds incredible. She was. When I started winning local tournaments, she'd scrimp and save for entry fees. Wore the same dress to church for 2 years so I could play in the state championship. David paused, his throat tight with memory. I won that tournament. 12 years old, beat kids who had private coaches and expensive sets. Grandma Rose cried harder than I did. What happened? Why didn't you keep playing? The question hung between them like a challenge. David set down his coffee, choosing his words carefully. Life happened. Grandma got sick my senior year. Medical bills piled up. College scholarships required time I didn't have. I was working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. Chess became a luxury I couldn't afford. But you never stopped loving it. How could I? It's who I am. Every time I see a chessboard, every time I watch people play, it's like seeing a language I'm fluent in but not allowed to speak. Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest. I'm sorry. For what I said tonight. For how I treated you. You didn't deserve that. David met her eyes directly. You were scared. Scared. She almost laughed. Of what? Of losing. Of having your world turned upside down. Of discovering that everything you thought you knew about worth and value might be wrong. His voice was gentle, not accusatory. I've seen it before. People who've built their identity around never being wrong, never being beaten. The thought of losing isn't just about a game or a moment. It's about questioning everything. Victoria stared at him, this man who cleaned buildings by night and possessed wisdom that cut straight to the heart of things. You're right. I was terrified. I've spent my whole life winning, being the smartest person in the room, having all the answers. Tonight, sitting across from you, I realized I might not be any of those things. You're still smart, David said quietly. Intelligence isn't about never being wrong. It's about being willing to learn, to grow, to admit when someone else knows something you don't. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of understanding settling between them. Victoria reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand, calloused from work, steady from years of quiet strength. Play me again, she said. Not for marriage or bets or pride. Just play me. Teach me something I don't know. David smiled, the first truly relaxed smile she'd seen from him. Are you sure? I won't go easy on you just because we're in your apartment. I wouldn't want you to. As David began setting up the pieces, Victoria watched his hands move with practiced precision. Each placement was deliberate, respectful, like he was greeting old friends. There was something beautiful about his relationship with the game, pure, honest, untainted by ego or ulterior motives. David, she said as he finished the setup. Yes. Thank you. For giving me a chance to be better than I was tonight. He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never encountered before, unconditional acceptance mixed with gentle challenge. Not the fawning admiration of people who wanted her money, or the calculated interest of those seeking advantage. Just genuine recognition of her humanity, flaws and all. We all deserve chances to be better, he said simply. As they began to play, Victoria realized this felt different from every other chess game she'd ever experienced. There was no audience to impress, no status to maintain, no reputation on the line. Just two people, connecting over 64 squares, discovering something unexpected and precious in the space between competition and companionship. For the first time in years, Victoria Sterling wasn't trying to win. She was trying to understand. And somehow, that felt like the most important victory of all. What's the most unexpected place you found a real connection with someone? Share your story below. Sometimes the best relationships start where we least expect them. The photograph felt like a blade in Victoria's hands as she stared at David across the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel overlooking Central Park. The charity gala had ended hours ago, but the weight of discovery hung between them like a funeral shroud. Her private investigator had delivered the manila envelope that morning, and now the contents lay scattered across the mahogany coffee table like evidence in a murder trial. So this is who you really are, Victoria's voice cracked despite her efforts to maintain control. The photographs showed David in a federal prison uniform, younger, thinner, but unmistakably him. David Washington, convicted of assault. 3 years in Sing Sing. Released 18 months ago. David's face had gone ashen, his hands trembling as he reached for the images. Victoria, let me explain. Explain what? She stood abruptly, her evening gown rustling like accusation. That you lied to me? That everything, the chess, the stories about your grandmother, The way you made me believe in something real was all built on deception. The city sparkled below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, but neither saw its beauty now. David's voice was barely a whisper. I never lied about loving you. Don't. Victoria turned away, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Don't you dare talk to me about love when you've been lying about who you are this entire time. Do you have any idea what this could do to my reputation? To my family's company? Your reputation? David's voice gained strength, edged with something dangerous. 3 months ago, you were ready to marry me because I beat you at chess. Now you're worried about your reputation because I made a mistake when I was 23. A mistake. Victoria whirled around, her eyes blazing. You put a man in the hospital, David. The report says he was in a coma for 6 days. David's jaw tightened, the muscle working as he fought for control. He was attacking my sister. Some rich college boy thought he could take whatever he wanted from a girl from Queens. I stopped him. By nearly killing him. By protecting the only family I had left. David's voice rose, 8 years of buried shame and rage finally breaking free. You want to know the truth, Victoria? The whole truth? That rich college boy was just like you, believed his money made him untouchable. Believed people like me existed for his entertainment. Victoria recoiled as if he'd slapped her. People like you? What's that supposed to mean? You know exactly what it means. David stood, his frame filling the space between them. I've spent 18 months rebuilding my life, working jobs that made me invisible because I thought that's what I deserved. Then you came along with your chess challenge and your cruel little game, and for the first time in years, I remembered who I used to be. I never meant. You never meant what, Victoria? To fall for the help? To let someone beneath your social class touch your precious world? David's laugh was bitter. I should have known this was temporary. People like you don't actually change. You just pretend to, until reality gets inconvenient. The words hung in the air like poison. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, tears finally spilling over her carefully applied makeup. That's not fair. Fair. David moved toward her, his eyes blazing with hurt and fury. You want to talk about fair? I spent 3 years paying for protecting my sister from a predator. I've worked double shifts for 18 months, sending every spare dollar to pay his medical bills even though he destroyed my family. And now when I finally find something worth fighting for again, you throw my past in my face like I'm some kind of monster. You should have told me, Victoria whispered. When you were mocking me in the chess club. When you were bragging about how you'd never lose to someone like me. When you introduced me to your father as David from the cleaning company, like I was some fascinating pet you'd found. Each word was a scalpel, precise and devastating. Victoria stumbled backward until she hit the window, the cool glass shocking against her exposed shoulders. I changed, she said desperately. You know I changed. These past 3 months. Did you? David's voice was deadly quiet now. Or did you just enjoy the novelty? The thrill of slumming it with a dangerous janitor? Stop it. Victoria was sobbing now, her perfectly styled hair coming undone. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. Something I should have been from the beginning. David moved to the table, gathering the scattered photographs. Your investigator was thorough. Did he also tell you that the victim's family has been harassing me for 2 years? That they've cost me 4 jobs by showing up at my workplace with these same pictures? Victoria's blood ran cold. David. They called Sterling Industries this morning, Victoria. Spoke directly to your father. Told him all about his daughter's jailbird boyfriend and what a liability I'd be to the family reputation. The room spun around Victoria. She pressed her palms against the window, fighting for breath. Daddy called you. He called my supervisor. Had me fired on the spot. Then he called me directly. David's voice was mechanical now, drained of emotion. Offered me $50,000 to disappear. When I refused, he made it clear what would happen to anyone who employed me in this city. He had no right. He had every right. He's protecting his investment. Just like you're protecting yours right now. David moved toward the door, each step deliberate and final. Where are you going? Somewhere I can't hurt your precious reputation anymore. Victoria pushed away from the window, stumbling after him. David, please. We can figure this out. I can talk to Daddy, make him understand. David stopped at the door, his hand on the handle. When he turned back, his face was a mask of resignation that broke her heart completely. Understand what, Victoria? That you love me? Because standing here right now, looking at you choose your reputation over my humanity, I'm not sure you even know what love is. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. Victoria sank to her knees on the marble floor, her designer gown pooling around her like spilled wine. The photographs lay scattered at her feet, evidence of a past that had destroyed her future, taken from her the only man who had ever seen beyond her money to the woman beneath. Outside, New York pulsed with its 8 million heartbeats, but inside the Plaza penthouse, there was only the sound of a trust fund princess learning what it meant to lose the only thing money couldn't buy. The cruel irony of it all, sometimes the biggest prison isn't the one with bars. Tell us in the comments, when has your past threatened to destroy your future happiness? The rain had stopped by the time Victoria found herself standing outside David's apartment building in Queens at 2:47 a.m. Her Tesla looked absurdly out of place on the modest street, like a diamond ring in a toolbox. She sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. What am I doing here? The question echoed in her mind, but she already knew the answer. She was here because for the first time in her life, she'd found something, someone, worth fighting for. Worth humbling herself for. The argument with her father 3 hours earlier still rang in her ears. You will not disgrace this family by associating with that janitor, he'd spat, his face red with fury. I don't care what games he won or how charming you think he is. There are standards, Victoria. Expectations. Whose expectations? She'd shot back. Yours? Society's? Or mine? Don't be naive. You know how this world works. But that was exactly the problem. She was finally seeing how ugly that world really was. Now, staring up at David's building, Victoria felt something she'd never experienced before, genuine fear of rejection. Not the casual dismissal she was used to giving others, but the soul-deep terror that someone she truly cared about might not want her anymore. Her phone had 17 missed calls from her father, 12 from her mother, and 43 text messages from friends asking if she'd lost her mind. The gossip mill had already begun churning. Victoria Sterling, seen leaving the chess club with a janitor. The scandal would be front-page news in the society sections by morning. She thought about David's face when she'd fled the club, the way his expression had shifted from triumph to confusion to something that looked dangerously close to heartbreak. He'd called her name, but she'd been too much of a coward to turn around. Coward. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed a woman she barely recognized. Mascara smudged, hair disheveled, the carefully constructed facade finally cracked wide open. For 28 years, she'd been playing a role, being the perfect daughter, the perfect heiress, the perfect ice queen. But David had seen through all of that to something real underneath. And she'd run. Victoria pulled out her phone and dialed David's number, her heart hammering against her ribs. It went straight to voicemail. His voice warm and steady. "You've reached David. Leave a message." The beep echoed in her car like a gunshot. "David, it's Victoria." Her voice cracked on her own name. "I know I don't deserve to ask this after how I acted tonight, but could we talk? I'm downstairs. I know it's late, and I know I have no right to be here, but—" She closed her eyes, forcing herself to say the words that terrified her most. "I think I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know how to do that. I've never been brave enough to try." She hung up and waited. 5 floors up, David sat on his narrow bed, staring at his phone. Victoria's message played on speaker, her vulnerable confession filling his small apartment with the weight of possibility and pain. He'd spent the last 3 hours replaying every moment of their evening together. The way she'd laughed when he'd made his opening move, the genuine surprise in her eyes when she realized she was losing, the moment when her carefully constructed walls had started to crumble. And then, just as quickly, watching her rebuild them and disappear into the night. His grandmother's chess set sat on the small table by the window, the pieces still arranged from the game he'd been playing against himself, trying to make sense of what had happened. Trying to make sense of what he was feeling. "She's Victoria Sterling," his practical mind warned. "And you're nobody. This is exactly how these stories end, with people like you getting hurt." But his heart, his stubborn, hopeful heart, remembered something else. The way she'd looked at him when he'd explained his strategy, like she was seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. The way her breath had caught when their hands accidentally touched over the chessboard. The way she'd said his name, soft and wondering, like it was something precious. David walked to his window and looked down at the street. Victoria's Tesla gleamed under the streetlights like a promise or a threat, he couldn't tell which. His phone rang. Her number flashed on the screen. He stared at it for 3 rings, 4, 5. On the 6th ring, just before it would go to voicemail, David Washington made a choice that would change both their lives forever. He answered. "Victoria." "David." Her relief was audible even through the phone. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for running, for being such a coward, for—" "Come up," he said quietly. "5th floor, apartment 5C. Have you ever had to choose between what's expected of you and what your heart truly wants? Tell us in the comments. Sometimes the biggest risk is the one most worth taking." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Victoria's penthouse overlooking Central Park, casting golden light across the chess set that had changed everything. 6 months had passed since that night at the Manhattan Chess Club, and the ivory pieces seemed to glow with the memory of the game that transformed 2 lives forever. Victoria Sterling Washington, she'd kept both names, a decision that had scandalized Manhattan society and delighted her heart, stood at the window in David's old Columbia University t-shirt, watching joggers wind through the park below. The engagement ring on her finger caught the light, not the massive diamond her father had expected her to choose, but a simple band with a small stone that David had saved for months to buy. Thinking too hard again, David's voice came from behind her, warm with the affection that had grown deeper every day since their wedding 3 months ago. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against his chest, marveling at how perfectly they fit together, not just physically, but in all the ways that mattered. "I was thinking about that night," she murmured, turning in his arms. "How terrified I was after you won." "Terrified?" David raised an eyebrow, his smile teasing. "The Victoria Sterling I met didn't seem terrified of anything." "That's exactly why I was terrified." Her fingers traced the collar of his shirt. He wore button-downs now, having left the janitorial job to pursue his master's degree in engineering at Columbia. Victoria had insisted on paying for his education, not as charity, but as an investment in their future. I'd built my whole identity around being untouchable. Then you touched my heart with 64 squares and 32 pieces. David cupped her face gently. You know what I was thinking about during that final move? Not winning. Not proving anything. I was thinking about how beautiful you looked when you really concentrated, how your whole face changed when you stopped performing and started actually playing. Liar. But she was smiling, the real smile that only David ever saw, unguarded, vulnerable, completely his. Cross my heart. He kissed her forehead. Though I admit, the look on Chloe's face when you announced our engagement was pretty satisfying too. Victoria laughed, remembering the chaos that had followed their whirlwind courtship. Her father had threatened to disown her, her social circle had gossiped mercilessly, and the tabloids had had a field day with headlines like "Heiress Marries the Help." But for the first time in her life, Victoria hadn't cared about the opinions of people who had never truly known her. Speaking of which, David said, pulling away slightly, are you ready for the big announcement today? Victoria's stomach fluttered with nervous excitement. Today they were revealing the newest Sterling Industries initiative at a press conference in Times Square, a scholarship program for underserved youth, specifically targeting brilliant minds who needed opportunities. David would be the program's first director, and Victoria would step down from her executive role to focus on hands-on mentoring. My father still thinks I've lost my mind, Victoria said, adjusting David's tie with practiced intimacy. Giving up my position to work with charity cases, as he calls them. Your father's definition of value is very different from ours, David replied diplomatically. He'd learned to navigate Victoria's family dynamics with the same strategic thinking he brought to chess, patient, observant, always thinking 3 moves ahead. David. Victoria's voice grew serious. Do you ever regret it? How everything changed so fast? He considered her question with a thoughtfulness she'd fallen in love with. Victoria, before that night, I was invisible. Not just to society, but to myself. I'd convinced myself that my dreams didn't matter, that I didn't deserve more than what life had given me. You didn't just see me, you made me see myself again. But I was awful to you. The things I said were said by someone who was hurting in ways she didn't even understand. David's thumb brushed across her cheek. You apologized, you changed, you chose love over pride. That's not something everyone can do. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mr. and Mrs. Washington? The car is ready. Victoria grabbed David's hand as they headed toward the door, their fingers interlacing naturally. One more thing, she said, stopping him at the threshold. If we could go back to that night, knowing everything that would happen, the fights with my family, the media attention, all of it, would you still make that final move? David brought their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. Victoria, every single day I wake up and make that move again. Choosing you is the easiest decision I've ever made. The elevator descended toward the lobby, toward the waiting car, toward the press conference that would announce their joint venture to the world. But for Victoria, the most important announcement had already been made 6 months ago with 4 simple words. Checkmate. Will you marry me? As they stepped into the bustling energy of Fifth Avenue, Victoria caught their reflection in a storefront window, a billionaire heiress and a former janitor, hand in hand, ready to change the world together. The image should have looked incongruous, but instead, it looked exactly right. Ready to win the next game? David asked as their driver held open the car door. Victoria squeezed his hand, her heart full of the kind of wealth that couldn't be inherited or earned, only discovered. With you? I've already won. The car pulled into New York traffic, carrying them toward Times Square, toward cameras and questions and the curious eyes of a world that was still learning what love actually looked like when it chose courage over convention. Behind them, Central Park stretched green and endless, and ahead of them, their future waited like a chessboard full of infinite possibilities. In the end, the most beautiful victories weren't the ones where you conquered your opponent. They were the ones where you discovered that your greatest opponent had been yourself all along, and your greatest prize was learning how to love and be loved without reservation. The game was over. Love had won. What's the most unexpected place you've discovered something life-changing? Share in the comments. Sometimes our biggest blessings come disguised in the most ordinary moments.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you love this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing as you can never imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.